Karnak Temples. Karnak is a difficult site to understand. Champollion, the Frenchman who first deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, described it as so vast and so grandiose that the Egyptians must have designed it for men 100 feet tall. Not only is Karnak huge, the complex covers over 2 square kilometers, 1.6 square miles, but it is the result of almost constant building activity that began over 4,700 years ago and continues even today. The Temple of Amen-Ra, Karnak's principal building, is the largest religious structure ever built. It was the god's home on earth, and around it lay the homes of his relatives, his wife, Mut, and their son, Khonsu. Their temples, too, are enormous. Successive kings renewed, repaired, and enlarged these residences, much as generations of a family might remodel their ancestral home to accommodate changing needs and tastes. The earliest structures found at Karnak date to the Middle Kingdom, but there are references to building activity as early as Dynasty III, and archaeological evidence shows that the site was inhabited thousands of years before that in prehistoric times. In the New Kingdom, each king in turn seems to have vied with his predecessors to build a bigger monument here. Kings tore down earlier buildings and used the stones to construct new ones. For example, Amenhotep III built a pylon with stones he took from over a dozen earlier structures. Kings often remodeled a predecessor's building, then erased and redecorated its walls, replacing the earlier king's name with their own. Egyptologists find it difficult to track the history of all this activity. Egypt's New Kingdom rulers were exuberant builders, and they spent fortunes adding to Karnak's size and complexity and to its wealth. Its priesthood was one of the richest in Egypt. New Kingdom records show that the priest of the Temple of Amen owned over 81,000 slaves and servants, 421,000 head of cattle, 691,000 acres of agricultural land, 83 ships, 46 shipyards, and 65 cities. In the reign of Ramses III alone, the temple received gifts that included 31,833 kilograms of gold, 997,805 kilograms of silver, 2,395,120 kilograms of copper, 3,722 bolts of cloth, 880,000 bushels of wheat, 289,530 ducks and geese, and untold quantities of oil, wine, fruits, and vegetables. For economic as well as religious reasons, Amen truly was king of the gods. Over 200 large structures have been found at Karnak. Undoubtedly, there are hundreds more. Some are simple mud brick buildings that have nearly vanished. Some are elegant structures built of fine alabaster. Others are enormous monuments of sandstone and granite with walls 15 meters, 49 feet, thick that stand 50 meters, 164 feet high. By the late New Kingdom, Karnak had become so crowded that new structures were built wherever space permitted, and older buildings were often demolished to accommodate them. Clearly, there never was a master plan for the site. Many of Karnak's monuments are poorly preserved. Wind and water erosion have taken their toll, and earthquakes like that in 27 BC caused damage so great that engineers are still working to repair it. Curiously, the huge walls, pylons, and columns at Karnak were erected on the flimsiest of foundations, often nothing more than shallow trenches filled with pea gravel. Rising groundwater so weakened the foundations of some buildings that they simply collapsed. That happened in October 1899, when columns in the hypostyle hall toppled with a crash heard from miles around. Many parts of Karnak were razed by later rulers. Ptolemy IX is a prime example of such a vandal, or used by early Christians as houses, stables, and monasteries, or damaged in local riots and wars. Over the last 2 millennia, tourists have scrawled their names on decorated walls and hacked out pieces of relief. treasure hunters have dug for objets d'art, in the process destroying much of the site. Yet, hundreds of hectares of Karnak still remain unexplored, and many structures are known only from bits of stone jutting through dirt and weeds or found reused in later buildings. For all these reasons, Karnak remains a bewildering architectural puzzle. It began as a few small shrines scattered about the present site, then grew outward from them like overlapping ripples on a pond. If you walk for 10 minutes in any direction among its ruins, you will encounter buildings from nearly every period of Egypt's history in no predictable chronological order. Karnak can be divided into 4 areas. To the north, a large enclosure is home to a temple for the god Khonsu. Another enclosure is dedicated to the goddess Ma'at, and there are numerous smaller buildings of stone and mud brick. The Khonsu temple may have been connected by an avenue of sphinxes to a much earlier temple for that god at Medamud, a site 5 kilometers, 3 miles, farther north. To the east, Amenhotep IV Akhenaten built a huge open-air temple complex dedicated to his solar deity, the Aten. To the south, another enclosure wall surrounds a temple to the goddess Mut and smaller temples for Amenhotep III and Ramesses III.